Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Jordan, and welcome to the latest edition of Levalytics on Video. I just want to kick things off by saying I'm sorry that we did not get a letter out on Friday, but if you've read the newsletter, you did get to see that I did pick up a new golden doodle. So the reason why nothing went out last week is because I was on the road on Thursday, running around all over town, driving up and down the highway to go pick up this new dog. So I'm really excited. The dog is here. It's 8 weeks old, and been keeping me up all night. A lot of late nights, and getting in and out of bed to go take it to the restroom. That's the whole potty training game. But the good news is we are back, and we have a new edition of research for you guys. So let's just get into it. So this week we talked about the way to gauge for value and momentum by looking at market cap for cryptocurrencies. You either look at the market cap on its own, its market cap rank, or across other assets like the entire cryptocurrency space, or versus assets within its own sector. And by looking at market cap in all of these different ways, you get to see how much weight a certain asset or network is holding within the crypto financial universe for investing. And that is the main point of the article today. And we decided, when I kicked things off in the article, I talked about why did I pick the privacy sector. So for a little bit of context, now it's known as the privacy sector, right? These assets like Litecoin, Monero, Zcash, Dash, Decred. These days, it's called the privacy sector. The reality is that these weren't always privacy assets. For example, Litecoin wasn't always a privacy coin. Decred wasn't always a privacy coin. And one thing to keep in mind is that this sector is also known as dino coins, and people call them dino coins. If you haven't been around in the crypto space for a long time, the reality is that the dino coins just mean that they've been around forever. A lot of these assets launched, I think Litecoin's been around since 2013, 2014, and the rest of these assets, Monero, Zcash, Decred, Dash, they've all been around since like 2015, 2016. So the main point of selecting this sector is for multiple reasons, not the main point, but multiple reasons, is that they've been around for a long time. So there's a lot of trading history, a lot of data to look at. So you can kind of get a gauge for what long-term investing trends looks like for this sector, right? A lot of different sectors in crypto don't exactly have the same thing. OG DeFi assets have like a pretty solid history at this point since like 2020. You can go back to that, so you can look at like 6 years of trading data for that. But if you look at things like the new DeFi sector, like Aerodrome, Hyperliquid, and all that, there's just not that much like historical data to like gauge what long-term investing looks like for this sector, right? So that is one of the main reasons why this sector was selected for this study. And the other reason is that it is a sector, the privacy sector is a sector that has historically really underperformed the rest of the market. Not only Bitcoin. You have to keep in mind when people look at crypto markets or you're investing in the crypto universe, everyone's like, oh, how did this asset perform versus Bitcoin? That's not the only question you need to be asking yourself. The other question you need to ask yourself is this at least outperforming other assets within the space? Other altcoins. So that's what the value of looking at the market cap rank of any asset is. And that's what this first chart is within the article. So let's just dive into the charts right now. So let's kick things off at the beginning where I built this chart way back in the day for Dude Terminal. I put it on the website and I remember going, interesting. These some of these assets are just ripping in terms of market cap ranking. But when I say ripping, I mean that they are moving up the market cap rankings in a good way, right? This means they're getting close to that number one spot. So let's just look at, for example, Zcash. Zcash is this red line. Going into the end of 2025, it was ranked 111, basically worse than 100 in the market cap rankings for crypto assets. And it's ripped all the way up to 16. Now it's like a top 20 asset within the cryptocurrency space. And I noticed that, Zcash is not the only asset doing this. Dash did the same thing. Decred did the same thing. And this is a gigantic reversal of trend. So that really caught my attention. And I was like, okay, so what is going on here? What is special? Why now? And what are ways for me to gauge if this is like, what is going on with this trend? Why is it happening? And also like, how long has this trend been going on? Maybe, I'm like under the impression just by looking at this data that, it started at the end of 2025. The real question though is that like, has this been building under the hood for a little bit longer? And that's what I kind of dive into a little bit more in the next few charts within this article. But before I dive into those, the pink line down here just shows the percentage of assets within this sector that are within the top 100. And as you can see that at the beginning of 2023 was the beginning of the real death/descent of this sector. People stopped caring about it. And I think, during this period, from 2020, 2021 was like the initial emergence of DeFi. Then out of the ashes of the 2022 bear market, I think there was like this new renewed vigor and energy to the DeFi space and lots of new tokens getting created. So naturally, I think the money and attention started to flow in that direction, right? So you stop thinking about these old dino coins, quote unquote, that, effectively are like Bitcoin insurance policies. That's what back in the day what these assets were. They were like, oh, if Bitcoin does X, then this alternative Dino coin can do another thing that Bitcoin doesn't do, right? So that to some extent, they're kind of like viewed as like BTC insurance policies where you own it as like a some sort of like sub-owning version of a Bitcoin alternative, basically. And so, yeah, what we saw was that starting in the beginning of 2023, with all these things going into play, the attention just completely shifted away from the privacy coins, right? Going all the way through down to 2025 where it bottomed, around this area, not this area, this entire year, 2025, where it really was obvious that things bottomed. You could argue, if you look at some later charts that I'm about to show you in the article, 2024 was the real proper bottom for some of these assets, but this whole area is 2024, 2025 is where things really leveled out. And you can see it a little bit in the market cap rankings here too, right? Like they kind of start going sideways, right? Instead of just trickling downwards, which they've been doing for years. So yeah, that's like the introduction to the article. Let's jump into the next chart. Okay, so this shows the rank change of these assets, the Dino coin / privacy assets on a number basis, not on a percentage basis. So what I mean by this is like privacy, when I say like a rank change, let's just say an asset was ranked 200 out of all the crypto assets, and then it moved to rank 100. That would equal a -1, right? That's a good thing. That would equal a -100 on this chart. So negative values are bullish. That means that it's moving closer to 1. The top dog ranking. So the trend is pretty obvious here, right? This goes all the way back to 2020 where you can see that the trend is up. And like I told you, positive values are not a good thing. And keep in mind, one other thing I need to mention, that this chart shows the 15-month change in rank for each asset, right? 15-month. So this is a long-term measurement of the trend, just so you understand where investors are feeling about this asset and where these assets are falling within the larger asset class, right? If you're getting positive prints of these values, that means a bunch of other assets are jumping in front of you and outperforming you and holding more value within the market. And, that's not a good thing. That means attention's getting taken away and, all these things are like very reflexive assets, especially because a lot of them, especially these Dino coins, they don't have like revenue. They're kind of built to be real cryptocurrencies. They're built to be currencies. So, they're very reflexive, probably even more reflexive than the DeFi assets. Because, the DeFi assets, there's some sort of expectation of revenue or some sort of performance on the underlying or what the network does or all these other different things, whereas these cryptocurrencies are just expected to a lot of them do actually make a lot of changes and do these different things, but they're merely for the most part are kind of just expected to exist, and over time they just gain network effects and then they become reflexively more valuable. As you've seen though, that has not really been the case, right? Just going back to late 2019 all the way through up until 2024, right? All these privacy assets are just trading upwards. That means all these privacy coins are just underperforming the market. This is all terrible. And at the peak of this, where things got peak bearish for assets like Zcash and Dash, for example, in mid 2024, you had Zcash drop 100 spots in the rankings, in the market cap rankings over a 15-month span. This is death, right? And that's not really a good look. But basically this was the bottom. So some people argue that the underperformance for Zcash ended in mid to early 2024. And since then, it's just basically been on a ripper. You can see it. Hold on one second. Let me hide some of these other ones really quick. This is Zcash, right? Ever since early 2024, this thing's been ripping downwards. So it's basically been in a bull trend versus the rest of the crypto market for a long time. It only became obvious at the end of 2025 when the USD price went vertical. So that's something to keep in mind. Like I said, I told you I was going to show you some other charts that showed like, hey, it became obvious at the end of 2025 that there was like kind of a revival of this Dino coin sector for whatever reason. Some people might say it's like related to quantum or a newfound respect for privacy. I really couldn't give you the reason, nor do I really care. I think opportunistically, you just need to understand that this is what's going on. We're kind of here, on this channel and within the newsletters to kind of just talk about things as they are. I'm not really trying to push any sort of view onto the market. You have to just like play the ball as it lies, as some people would say. But yeah, so basically Zcash has just been kind of ripping in its own right ever since April 2024, and it only became obvious at the end of 2025 when it just went vertical. And yeah, so you can see that like a lot of these assets for the first time in years, right? 2020 to 2024, it's like a 4-year drought where prices were just stagnant. Things were not going well. Like let's just even drag this further out, all the way back to 2018. Zcash never outperformed the market. Look at this. Nothing. Just pure dog shit price action. The entire market is just running away without it. It's just completely irrelevant, dead. Next thing you know, boom. Takes 18 months to turn this thing into like the best trading asset on the planet. Yeah, so things change quickly, but long story short though, you can just see that you always want these negative values. And yeah, like I said, these are numerical values. So as of today, over the past 15 months, Zcash has jumped 88 spots in the rankings. Okay. So here we are adjusting, we're just doing market cap change on a percentage basis versus as opposed to a numerical basis. The problem with the numerical measurement is that you can have an asset that's, for example, ranked number 50, and the most it can ever jump is 49 places, right? So, and if you try to compare that to an asset that's ranked 200 and it jumps 100 places, there's a difference there because the one that's ranked 200 can jump 199 places. So it'll look like it's doing better than the other asset that can only jump 49 places. So this is the percentage change in market cap rank. And the ones that we have showing in this chart are Zcash, which is the red one, Decred, which is the blue one, and then Dash, which is the orange one. And you can see this goes all the way back to 2017. These have never had like all three of them. So that last chart I showed you, like you thought, oh, this is only Zcash that's trading like this. It's like, no. Since their existence, basically, since the 2017 bull market, and where some of these assets actually perform pretty damn well, right? Back then you're like, oh, I'm crushing it, doing good. The reality is that after that period, they've done nothing but underperform the market, nothing but just dropping down the rankings with all these positive value prints. That means more and more assets are either coming onto the market or assets from behind are outperforming it. And it's been nothing but positive for close to a decade. I mean, it's mid 2026, and this goes back to 2017, right? So we are like 9 years into just nothing but dragging against the market. And lo and behold, Zcash broke into this positive area in 2025, like mid 2025, where it started outperforming the market. And then you have like Dash and Decred finally getting their little laggard type move as well. So I think it's just important to understand that this is a very rare move. And you have to notice, like, it's the number one thing in looking at any analytics, at any market, whatever you're doing. If there's a very long-term trend that's been going on in something and it finally breaks or changes, it is time to pay attention. That doesn't mean throw all risk management out the window and not think about anything else besides just aping into the position. It means it is time to pay attention and start doing your homework. And that's exactly what we're doing here. This is why I wrote this article. It's kind of been on my mind for a little bit, and to the point where, normally Tuesdays I publish the market general analysis plus portfolio analysis for Levalytics. And, Fridays are normally like these deeper research type articles. But, because this idea popped in my head, I made a few charts. I was like, oh, I'm kind of on my way. These are one of these things that's also like helpful for, readers and subscribers to the YouTube channel, where you can kind of get a feel. It's like, oh, this is like a big deal. And, the good thing is that I built this data out for a bunch of other sectors as well. So I just need to get all this stuff onto the Dude Terminal website. It's not yet. I still have this huge backlog of charts, which I will get to, I promise. It's just been busy. Life's been chaotic. So I just got to get that done and move on with it. But yeah, so this chart though, you can see like these values have just been drifting out of touch with the market, and everything's just been outperforming it, right? And then we finally get this break below zero. And it's been happening, for assets like Decred and Dash, it happened in late 2025. And then for Zcash, it happened mid 2025. And I think a lot of people are just kind of asleep at the wheel. A lot of people are like, oh, Zcash is like, pumping. And I think a lot of people, especially the past, few months have been like, oh, this was a scam pump. But if you go look at the chart, we talked about it in previous streams that it is looking resilient. And the thing is that people need to understand, when you break a very, very long-term trend, the resulting trend, the reversal of that trend, can also be very lengthy. So you have to ask yourself, does a 9-year downtrend reversal dissipate in 6 months? My answer would be probably not. Like, there'd probably be like a couple years of like these assets potentially outperforming the market. And keep in mind, like, as always, you kind of need to not like you have to move diligently. You have to move smart. You have to evaluate the trend, right? Just because this data print happens doesn't mean that anything has to happen, right? It is just potentially a great signal for us to start paying attention, looking at the chart, and being opportunistic about when would be a good time to maybe take a stab at these assets. That's like the idea. That's the whole point of this article. But yeah, this is significant. Like, do not get it twisted. I think if you asked anybody off of the street that knew anything about crypto, they would tell you, like, yeah, I mean, a 9-year downtrend for privacy assets getting broken versus the market. It's like, okay, well, maybe these things are due steamrolling over some competitors and getting out of the way and accumulating more capital. And, there's an element to some of these assets that they've been around for 10 years where there's an element of like the Lindy effect, where it's like, this thing hasn't died yet. It's more likely to continue being a thing. How many crypto projects have just like puckered out and just died, and these assets are still kicking. There's still networks that are functional with teams working on them. So that's another thing to keep in mind. This is how these things become really reflexive over time. It's like the network effect just expands and people trust them more and more the longer they exist and the longer that they don't die. So yeah, it's like Brian Johnson, don't die. Okay, so this chart right here, this actually wasn't included within the article, this pink trace, but this pink trace shows the total market cap for all these privacy assets, or these /Dino coins. And there's not like a crazy takeaway about this line, to tell you the truth, but it's like the number one thing that I'm pulling from it is, if you look at from beginning of June 2022, this looks like it's starting to become a potential parabola. You never really know, right? For sure. But this buildup is looking very pre-parabolic. If you start getting a certain type of price action where prices just start ripping across the sector, that's something to think about. This, like I said, this is not very actionable. This is just kind of me being anecdotal, staring at the chart. It just popped out to me when I didn't include it in the article. So it's not very there's not much rigor going into that, so I don't feel like it's very appropriate to go share that in the article. But because we're on YouTube, we're kind of just having a good time chopping it up. Grip it and rip it analysis on the Levalytics channel. This is something that I think about. Does it keep me up at night? No, but I think about it during the day. So let's go to the privacy market cap denominated in BTC. One thing that's really annoying about this line is that I need to fix this. It's a light green line, so viewers might not be able to see it, but I'll just talk you through it anyways. You can just listen to my voice, follow my voice. The peak of this privacy sector, if you take it as a percentage of the Bitcoin market cap, was 14%. That's the most all these assets added up together ever were versus Bitcoin. That's something to keep in mind in terms of like relative value. It was 14.8% was the peak out top. And then we are down to now 1.22%. So it is down a fair amount, 90% plus, right? So that's something we need to keep in mind moving forward. It's like a deep value. And I think one thing that pops in my head a little bit with what's been going on is, like I mentioned earlier on in the video, a lot of these assets back in the day, if they're not really viewed this way as much anymore, they were kind of viewed as Bitcoin insurance to some extent. If anything ever went wrong with Bitcoin, then people move on to this asset, which, that just never really caught on, which is why these assets kind of like died out for a long time. I think there is an element to, for insurance to be valuable, for people to be willing to pay a healthy premium for the insurance, the underlying asset has to be valuable. Right. So back in 2018, just Bitcoin wasn't even big enough to justify this. This just didn't make sense to own these assets. Now, Bitcoin is a juggernaut in the financial world. It is viewed as like a potential alternative to not the dollar. I think that's pushing it a little bit right now, but gold, that's enough. I think that's fair. Maybe I think a lot of people own gold and BTC as a part of their portfolio. And I think, there's a fair reason to do that. So long story short, though, is that the underlying asset Bitcoin is more valuable. So the question I ask myself is, does that make the insurance actually more valuable than ever to own. And if you asked me, based on all these combining factors, including the quantum threat, which my understanding is, I'm not a quantum expert, I haven't even done a second of research into it, basically, is that it's going to affect a lot of crypto in general. But the certain networks, because these other networks are smaller, their ability to adapt and make changes as needed, if I was to guess, is going to be a better process, an easier process than what Bitcoin's going to go through. That's, I think, the argument for understanding like why the BTC insurance plays could be outperforming the underlying, if that makes sense. That's what pops into my head, and gun to my head, it would make sense that this would move up. I don't think there's any fundamental reason I can give what percent, to justify what percentage this should move up to. If it should move back up to 10% like it was in April 2019, or if it just moves back up to 3%, if it basically doubles or triples from here. I do think though, with like this looming quantum threat and Bitcoin being more valuable and important than ever, I think purely on a narrative basis, and the fact that this trend, this 9-year downtrend for Dino coins has broken, I think there probably is some gas in the tank for continued outperformance, and for the peak not being 1.5%, which was in November 2025. So that's something to keep in mind, right? Because, now we have a change in momentum. We have momentum to the upside for these privacy assets for the first time in a decade. And we also have like some pretty deep value relative to the historical values there were before, right? So yeah, I don't know. It's like a healthy combination of the two going on. And, a lot of people think, oh, Zcash already pumped its dick off. It's like, it's too late. The reality is, this is a blip. I mean, look at this chart. If you're looking at this chart right now, you're not thinking, oh, this thing's already too pumped. It pumped. This is like the warning pump, in my opinion, if there's any real legs to this whole change in the tide. Okay, next chart. So this chart is simple. Just the top 3 assets in this sector, which are Zcash, Monero, and Litecoin, and their respective percentages of the Bitcoin market cap, their market caps are. And they're all just sitting around basically 0.5 to 0.3%, something in this range. And you can see they're all right next to each other at this point. For the majority of the trading history, Litecoin's been the top dog. But, look at this. It's compressed. Value has a relative large amount of value has left Litecoin and gone into, maybe not only these assets, but other assets in the market. I think, back in the day, Litecoin did hold a healthy premium because it was viewed as silver to BTC's gold. Another example of an asset, its literally elevator pitch was BTC insurance. I remember, I think, 2017, 2016, I can't remember, the upgrade to the Bitcoin network SegWit first happened on Litecoin. It was kind of viewed as like an experiment. So, so Litecoin's dying out. Let's zoom in a little bit, though. If you look at this rip. For a long time, Zcash was like not even in the conversation. Monero still, frankly, for a long time was not in the conversation with Litecoin either. It's still a relatively large gap. But the move up for Zcash, now it's just crowded space right now. This is crowded air. And, markets aren't always winner take all or zero sum to some extent, but there could be a possibility where maybe the breakout winner of this battle here ends up being the gigantic one that you want to make sure you have in your portfolio to some extent and gives you abnormally large returns over the next 12 to 18 months, possibly. But for right now, you have all of these assets just hovering around each other. And I think another thing to keep in mind is, like I said, hold on, let's zoom this back out really quick. This is, if we're talking about long-term trend changes, right? For a long time, Litecoin had a higher market cap than these other assets. Now it's trading below these. I mean, this is not a good sign. This is not a good sign at all for Litecoin. So, there's a new sheriff in town. There's a bunch of new sheriffs in town at this point versus Litecoin. And yeah, that's just something to pay attention to. If I was gonna bet between these three, I definitely would not bet on Litecoin, even though it is a privacy protocol. It is very clear that it has downside momentum, and particularly to these other assets, which you'll get a better view of in this chart. Which this chart shows you Litecoin, Monero, and Zcash, and the percentage of the privacy sector that they dominate, right? So for example, the total market cap of the privacy sector is 34% Zcash. It was 5% in September 2025. So it's up 7x since then. And it peaked out at 42% in November 2025. So this has been a silly run up, and now it's just in the mix. And let's just look at trends, right? For a long time, Litecoin was trading above this 50%. It was more than 50% of the privacy market cap, or the Dino Coin market cap, whatever you want to call it in crypto. And it's just ripped downwards. Hold on, let's close these other ones out. Litecoin, purple line by itself. I mean, this is a long-term trend break below 40% level. So this is concerning if you're a Litecoin holder. This does not look good. This looks like it's going to underperform in a big way, these other Dino coins, if the Dino coins pop off. Because, for a long time, like I said, this is the first time Zcash has ever traded above it. And the same for Monero. And Monero, frankly, has a healthier trend. Look at this thing. Let's just hide Litecoin for a second here. Monero has just been grinding upwards, taking more and more percentage of the total privacy coin market cap. For right now, this isn't anything to be too excited about or too excited about or too scared of. I think the most exciting one right now is Zcash, and I think for obvious reasons, because a lot of these other privacy coins, they don't even have exchange access. For example, Monero, I think, got blocked and blacklisted from a bunch of exchanges. So, Zcash actually has all the connections, has all the liquidity. It has all the price-driven momentum. And yeah, so here's actually another look at this chart that I actually wanted to give you guys, though. So this thing ranged, for Zcash, it ranged between 2 to 3%, from 3% basically, 2% up to 12, 13% for a decade. And then it just broke out. So that's another thing. This is just a long-term trend, once again, revealing itself in a different way within the privacy coin ecosystem. And yeah, it looks good. And I think, Zcash is probably the favorite, in terms of if you want to own the leader, the one that's going to perform the best. It looks like this is going to be the one that is a step above the rest. And, like I said, this is all for swapping. This is never financial advice, but this is also I'm just talking about on a trading basis. Long-term investing, make your own decisions. I'm not here to talk to you about fundamentals. Somebody else can do that. But yeah, the data speaks for itself. The chart speaks for itself. And I think don't fade things that are obvious. Don't fade gigantic changes and long-term trends. That is the theme of this article. And that's exactly what's going on in the privacy coin market cap analysis. And that's it. That's it for today. And this is the Dude Terminal website. As always, you can use dudeterminal.com if you want to go look at any of these charts. So keep in mind, these charts for this article have not been added. I still have a backlog of other charts that need to be added, but there's a bunch of stuff on here. If you ever want to get in the mix, if you want to see what percentage of the portfolio for Levalytics is long. Hold on one second. Where is it on here? What percentage of the Levalytics portfolio is long? And right now we are 67.59% long. No, 67.59% cash. So it means we're 32, 33% long. And yeah, you can look at a bunch of different things and just bop around. And if you ever have any suggestions that you want to give us, you can click the metric request button. And otherwise, if you ever want to go back to the newsletter or YouTube, just click on these buttons and those links will take you there. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I had to add to this section, but, oh, hold on one second. I can do a little bit of... Once again, we're just going back to the Zcash chart. Yeah, Zcash BTC still blue. Buy blue, sell red. As you guys know, that's my motto with my trading system. And I've talked about this in other videos. For those that are new here, when it comes to me for a trading system, I think some people do very well with very discretionary trading systems. For me, I prefer semi-automated, and I think the simple reason is that there is a strain on your brain if you have to make too many decisions. It's that simple. When you have a semi-automated trading system, you build other parameters around it related to your portfolio exposure as a whole. It just makes life way easier. That's just my 2 cents on the whole thing. And yeah, so Zcash still looks strong. It looks like it's broken out of this little range area on the chart. So it's just something to keep in mind. And, I guess we'll see what happens with it. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them to me on Twitter, on the Levalytics Substack, on the YouTube channel. And I just, like I said, I really appreciate your attention and time. And I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you have any feedback, just drop it in the comments. Otherwise, tell your friends about the channel or the newsletter and subscribe. Thanks again. Bye.